Okay, so we're going to begin reading The Assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. And this is a book by Cornerstones of Freedom. So here we go. A dismal rain fell on Memphis, Tennessee on January 31st, 1968. The storm was so intense that city authorities feared it would interfere with garbage collection. To save money that day, officials sent their African-American garbage collectors home. At the time, city workers were segregated. On payday, the blacks received only 2 hours of wages for the rainy day, while the white crews were paid for working the entire day. Reduced wages was only one of many grievances that the black employees had against the leaders in the Memphis city government. Finally, after several years of unfair treatment, the Memphis African-American sanitation workers went on strike. They called upon Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. to support them in their cause. So these are the workers right here on strike. The Memphis sanitation workers. And these are the National Guards right there as they looked out. Like, how scary is that with the guns pointing? They had to have been some fearless men right there. Martin Luther King Jr. grew up in the segregated South. He was forced to attend all black schools. He was even unable to drink from water fountains labeled whites only. Despite the restrictions limiting his life, he became an ordained minister and earned a doctor's degree in theology. His formal title was Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., but some of his close friends called him Doc. In 1955, King led a boycott against the Montgomery, Alabama bus system. The purpose of the boycott was to protest segregation on the city's public buses. Beginning with that protest, King became the guiding force behind the drive to break down the barriers of racial segregation in the United States. He delivered powerful speeches about equality for all people. In 1963, he spoke before 250,000 people gathered at the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will be judged not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. As the crowd roared its approval, King repeated again and again, I have a dream. I have a dream today. Look at Dr. King. Look at all those people by Lincoln Memorial. And look at this photo right here. This photo, King based his civil rights crusade, I hope you guys can see this. King based his civil rights crusade on the power of nonviolent protests. He and his followers sometimes marched through the neighborhoods where they were pelted with stones. Yet he told the marchers not to strike back. Violence is self-defeating, he said. He urged fighting with the weapon of love. His belief in nonviolence won him praise around the world and earned him the Nobel Peace Prize in 1964. Look at him accepting the Nobel Peace Prize. Surrounded by all his Caucasian brothers. When King arrived in Memphis in 1968, the civil rights movement faced a crucial turning point. Many African Americans were dissatisfied with the slow progress that nonviolent protest was making. Some of them chanted the cry, Black Power. This often implied black supremacy or an overthrow of white society. King was opposed to this idea. Also, by the spring of 1968, the United States was gripped by violence. Race riots has flared in several cities. The United States military was involved in the war in Vietnam, which King opposed. College campuses rocked with angry demonstrations. King called the turmoil and the divisions in the country a virus of hate that, if unchecked, will lead inevitably to our moral and spiritual doom. This is some of the people that are protesting in the street. Her signs say Black men should fight white racism, not Vietnamese freedom fighters. And that took place in New York in 1967. Look at this. I never seen some of these pictures. Woo. On April 3rd, see him right there? On April 3rd, 1968, King spoke in front of 2,000 supporters of the Memphis sanitation workers' strike. He just decided to attend the rally only at the last minute and had to address the crowd without prepared notes. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life, he said. Longevity has its place, but I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And he's allowed me to go up to the mountain. His voice grew louder and more intense. And I've looked over and I seen the promised land. I might not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. My eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. The crowd exploded in cheers and applause. King's message was inspiring and uplifting, but many of those present feared the words came from a man contemplating his own death. This is him right here. King had dedicated his life to overcoming prejudice. The threat of death haunted him ever since he had become the nation's foremost civil rights leader. In 1958, he was stabbed by a black woman named Izola Curry in New York City. The knife narrowly missed his heart. Even his recent flight to Memphis was delayed because someone had called the airline and claimed to have put a bomb on board his plane. And at that moment, he spoke before the crowd assembled in Memphis. No one could have known that it was the last speech he would ever make. That's Izola Curry, was arrested after she stabbed Martin Luther King. Why would this lady stab him? I don't know. If anyone knows the backstory. The next day, can you see this, guys? The next day, April 4th, 1968, James Earl Ray registered at Miss Brewer's rooming house on South Main Street in Memphis. Stuffed in his suitcase was a Memphis newspaper with a front page photo of King entering room 306 at the Lorraine Motel. Ray, a 39-year-old white man, requested a room at the back of the rooming house. He seemed pleased when he discovered his bathroom window offered a clear view of the Lorraine Motel and room 306, which was less than 200 yards away. See that? This is Miss Brewer's rooming house where James Earl Ray rented a room. And that's Martin Luther King on the balcony of his motel room with Reverend Jesse Jackson and a couple of other guys. At about 6 p.m. on April 4th, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. stepped onto the balcony outside his room. He had a busy evening planned, dinner at a friend's house and then a mass meeting at the Mason Street Temple. Below the balcony stood Ben Branch, who was slated to sing at the meeting. King called down to him to sing that song, Precious Lord, Take My Hand. He called out, "Sing it real pretty, Ben." A minute later, a shot rang out. Some witnesses said it sounded like a firecracker. Ralph Abernathy, King's friend and fellow minister, saw King fall to the balcony floor and rushed to his side. When Abernathy saw King lying motionless, he said, "Oh my God!" From down below, a woman screamed. Horror, panic, and confusion swept the motel grounds. Police raced to the scene. An ambulance siren wailed in the distance. In Miss Brewer's rooming house, James Earl Ray charged past another guest in the second-floor hallway and rushed down the back stairs. Witness later said he dropped a long bundle or package in front of a store, jumped into a white Mustang with Alabama license plates, and sped away. Police retrieved the package and discovered it contained a rifle with a telescopic sight. Wow. Witnesses point in the direction of the gunshot. This is the ambulance right here. And this is where he had sighting of his room. View of the Lorraine Motel from Miss Brewer's rooming house. King's room is circled. So sad. Investigators search for clues on the motel balcony. President Lyndon Johnson's right here. At 7:05 p.m., doctors at St. Joseph's Hospital in Memphis officially pronounced Martin Luther King Jr. dead. A single bullet has severed his spinal cord, killing him almost instantly. Around the country, radio and television stations interrupted their regular programs to announce King's death. Some people were glad to hear about King's death because they thought of him as a troublemaker. But the overwhelming majority of citizens agreed with the statement issued later by President Lyndon Johnson. America is shocked and saddened by the brutal slaying. In the King's home in Atlanta, Georgia, Coretta Scott King received a telephone call from her husband's young assistant, Jesse Jackson. Coretta, he said, Dr. Scott shot. Miss King had always worried about her husband's safety. Jackson had not yet said whether Martin was dead, but Coretta immediately sensed that the world would never be the same for her and her 4 children. She later wrote, the news hit me hard, not surprise, but shock, that the call I seemed subconsciously to be waiting for all our lives had come. This is King with his family. You know, look at the table. I just noticed in this picture that they had Gandhi up around their dinner table. He was a huge advocate for peace. Huge. And nonviolence. In many cities, angry mobs rioted and looted stores in response to King's death. I'm not going to pass this, but look. That's a National Guard on Capitol Hill. The worst rioting erupted in Washington, D.C. 10 people were killed in the Capitol. Arsonists started more than 700 fires. Some of the blazes burned only a few blocks away from the White House. The smell of smoke filled the air and the sidewalks were covered with broken glass. National Guard troops were called in to protect the White House and the Capitol building. Many Washingtonians who lived through that time would never forget the sight of machine guns set up on Pennsylvania Avenue. Across the nation, the rioting lasted for 3 days and nights. 46 people were killed. Some victims died in the crossfire between police and looters. Before the riots subsided, there was $45 million worth of property damage. Army troops patrolled Chicago, Washington, D.C., and Baltimore. Though the unrest was widespread, most African Americans remained peaceful. In fact, many noted with bitterness that innocent people were being killed, injured, and burned out of their homes, all in the name of Martin Luther King Jr., a man devoted to peace. Coretta Scott King later wrote, "Though I fully understood the desperate frustration with which the rioters reacted to Martin's death, it seemed an ironic tribute to the apostle of nonviolence. Immediately after the killing, Miss King faced the painful task of telling her children they would never see their father again. It was most difficult to explain to the youngest member of the family. 5-year-old Bernice had not yet been told of her father's death when the family went to the Atlanta airport to meet the casket. In her book, My Life with Martin Luther King Jr., Miss King recalled, Bernice started looking around and she asked, 'Mommy, where's Daddy?' I was silent and she said again, 'Mommy, where's Daddy?' By this time, my heart was breaking. Finally, I took her in my arms and sat down with her and I said, 'Bunny, Daddy is lying down in his casket in the back of the plane and he is asleep. When you see him, he won't be able to speak to you.' I could not explain any more to her." That's him and his 5-year-old daughter, Bernice. King's body was flown from Memphis to Atlanta for his funeral. The funeral service for Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was held on April 9, 1968, at the Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta. It was the same church where King's father and grandfather had preached. 23 United States senators, 47 congressmen, and 3 governors attended the funeral. Jacqueline Kennedy, widow of slain President John F. Kennedy, was there. Also present was Robert Kennedy, the brother of the president. At that time, Robert Kennedy was a popular choice to become president himself. But 2 months after King's murder, Robert Kennedy was also killed by an assassin. Inside the church, the mourners listened to a sermon King had delivered just 2 months earlier. If any of you are around when I have to meet my day, I don't want a long funeral. And if you get somebody to deliver the eulogy, tell him not to talk too long. I like someone to mention that day that Martin Luther King Jr. tried to give his life serving others. I like for someone to say that Martin Luther King Jr. tried to love somebody. This is his wife at the funeral. Beautiful. After the service, a funeral march began that led to the Southview Cemetery where King was to be buried. An estimated 150,000 people joined the procession. More than 120 million viewers watched on television. The casket bearing King's body was carried on a farm cart drawn by 2 mules. Look at this. History. Symbol of the Poor People's Campaign that King was planning to launch. He had hoped to lead a great congregation of blacks and whites united by poverty on a march through Washington, D.C. to demand justice for the nation's poor. Finally, the procession reached the cemetery. The gospel singer, Mahalia Jackson, sang "Precious Lord, Take My Hand," the song King requested moments before he was shot. Moments before he was shot. Wow. Look at this, back in the days. Oh my goodness, this makes me want to cry. This must be King's brother right here. He looks just like him. Look at his wife and his family and his, oh my goodness, it makes me want to cry. And you see the white and the black united. They both were there. James Earl Ray in 1960. This is the guy who killed Martin Luther King. I never seen him before until this day today. In the weeks following the shooting, James Earl Ray loomed as the prime suspect. Police identified him largely through fingerprints he left at a rooming house. Tracking him down, however, proved difficult. He had registered at Miss Brewer's house under the name John L. Millard. Ray was accustomed to using false names. Other names he used were Eric Starro Gott, Harry Lowe Miller, and John Willard. He had spent much of his adult life on the run from the law. Ray grew up an impoverished farm boy in Missouri. His criminal career began at a young age, and he was often in and out of jail. In 1960, Ray attempted to rob a supermarket. He was caught and sentenced to 20 years in prison. While behind bars, Ray became a jailhouse lawyer. He advised other inmates on how they could reverse their convictions in court. On April 23, 1967, Ray escaped from the Jefferson City prison in Missouri by hiding in a bread truck as it left the grounds. Outside prison walls, Ray drifted to California, Mexico, and Canada. His path finally led to Memphis, Tennessee, and to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. On June 8, 1968, a little more than 2 months after King's murder, James Earl Ray was arrested at Heathrow Airport in London, England. He was brought back to the United States under heavy guard. At his trial, he astonished the country by pleading guilty to the crime and claiming he was the sole assassin. He was sentenced to 99 years in prison. Ray's shocking admission of guilt left 2 important questions unanswered. First, why did Ray kill King? Second, did he really act alone? At an early age, Ray developed a hatred for blacks. Inmates who knew him in prison claimed he spoke bitterly against Martin Luther King Jr. Yet, enough motive for him to murder someone he had never met? Many Americans believe Ray was paid by someone else to be the sniper. Ray continues to serve his 99-year sentence. When speaking to police and to court authorities, Ray denied there was any group behind the assassination, but soon after his trial, he recanted his confession. He said the real murderer was a man named Raoul, but Ray's descriptions of Raoul were vague, and the detectives believed that Raoul was another made-up character. Although the case against Ray was closed long ago, many doubts and questions remain. This is King's birthday. Became a federal holiday in 1983. A federal holiday. After his death, Martin Luther King Jr. was praised and honored even more graciously than he was during his life. Few Americans have possessed his eloquence or his single-minded dedication to peaceful change in the United States. King's birthday, celebrated each year on the third Monday in January, became a federal holiday in 1983. Throngs of people regularly went to his grave in Atlanta, Georgia. Carved into his tombstone are the words he used to end his 1963 "I Have a Dream" speech. Free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, I'm free at last. I have a dream. This is his casket right here. I have a dream. Following are the excerpts from the famous speech given by Martin Luther King Jr. on August 28, 1963 at the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. I say to you today, my friends, so even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. This is our hope. This is the faith that I go back to the South with. With this faith, we will be able to hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope. With this faith, we will be able to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. With this faith, we will be able to work together, to pray together, to struggle together, to go to jail together, to stand up for freedom together, knowing that we will be free one day. And this will be the day when all of God's children will be able to sing with new meaning. My country, 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing. Land where my fathers died, land of the pilgrim's pride. From every mountainside, let freedom ring. And if America is to be a great nation, this must become true. So let freedom ring from the prestigious hilltops of New Hampshire. Let freedom ring from the mighty mountains of New York. Let freedom ring from the heightening Alleghenies of Pennsylvania. Let freedom ring from the snow-capped Rockies of Colorado. Let freedom ring from the curvaceous slopes of California. But not only that, let freedom ring from Stone Mountain of Georgia. Let freedom ring from Lookout Mountain of Tennessee. Let freedom ring from every hill and every molehill of Mississippi. From every mountainside, let freedom ring. And when this happens and we allow freedom to ring, when we let it ring from every village and every hamlet, from every state and every city, we will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, Black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last.